Welcome to the System Simplified podcast, where we feature top leaders who share stories on how to successfully systemize a business. Now, let's get started with the show. Hello, Adi Klevit here, the host of the System Simplified podcast, where I feature top founders, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders about systematizing a business. And today's episode is being brought to you by Business Success Consulting Group, where we create, document, optimize, and implement processes and procedures so businesses can grow and thrive. And today's guest is Rick Meekins. Hi, Rick.
Hi, Adi. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm fantastic. Springtime. Are you kidding me?
That's right. So you and I recorded a great podcast together. I was a guest on your podcast, and you're a great interviewer. We had a fantastic conversation, and I'm going to include that show in this show notes, so that will be right. So our listeners can listen. But now you are a guest on my podcast, which I'm very excited about. So I'm going to start, first of all, with your bio, and then we're going to have a great conversation.
All right, let's do it.
All right. So, Rick, you are an entrepreneur, strategic vision Sherpa, and Sherpa is a guide for those of our listeners that do not know. It's like a guide that takes people through the mountains and guides them. You're a podcaster who works with founders facing complex growth and leadership challenges. You help leaders clarify direction, align strategy with execution, and build organizations capable of carrying the weight of their vision. That's so important, because the vision can be huge and then they don't know how to carry it, or maybe they are doing more and the vision is not enough. So we really need to make sure it's aligned. And we're going to share practical insights drawn from real world examples.
Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So how did you get started, Rick?
Oh, well, Adi, it was interesting. I was one of those people. I guess you could call it like blessed. I kind of knew, what I wanted to be as a kid. And I didn't. The funny thing is, I didn't know what consulting was. But I remember, like in high school or something like that, they're like, "What do you want to be when you grew up?" I want to be an engineer or do something in business or something like that. And I remember I was in engineering school, and someone, threw that idea of consulting past me, and I was just like, "That's what I want."
What drew you to consulting? Like, why was at that point when you go, this is what I want? What are the things that appealed most to you?
It was the challenge. It really comes down to the challenge of being successful. I mean, you think about how many companies there are, and of course, as a younger person, you're only exposed to, like, the bigger brands and that sort of thing, and you see, like, the AT&T and the Verizon and those other companies, and it's just like, how do they become successful? How do they become the businesses that they are? And then reading historically about other businesses that came up over time, and it was just exciting to me. It was like the biggest chess match in the world. And, at the time I played a lot of chess. And so it was just like, okay, figuring out how we can, maneuver and move and make things happen. And it was just so exciting for me.
Wow, I agree with you. I mean, I've been a consultant. I also went to engineering school, and I got exposed to consulting in engineering school as well, because that's what a lot of the engineers, industrial engineers, that's what I studied. That's what they did. They went to consulting, and I started working in consulting companies. So I completely relate to it, because it's putting the pieces of the puzzle together and guiding, being the Sherpa,
Exactly.
being the guide, being the
Being the guy.
person who gets people to where they need to be. And it's a talent, it's a talent to be able to identify strategy and identify the right path. So what do you like most about being a consultant?
I think when I was younger, I really enjoyed, like, the strategy part of that, and I know that you can relate. It's like putting all the pieces together. It's like, here's your goal. Okay, let's figure out what the plan is to get from point A to point B. What do we need to get there, et cetera, et cetera. I think now, though, it's moved more into the entrepreneur themselves, the individual, because I see I hear the stories, being a podcaster, I hear all the stories about, how people have had to, do, whatever it takes in order to make their businesses successful. And, I take that back to my clients. And, while we talk about strategy, while we talk about systems and processes and that sort of thing, it's like, what is your life? How are you successful in life? How is your family engaged? Are you doing the things? Are you taking the time off? Are you resting and that sort of thing? And that's become really important to me. And so that becomes part of my conversation. And that's really why I moved from, being a consultant into being the Sherpa, because I get to guide. I'm not passive, and I don't like to say this in a negative way. I'm not passive like a coach, but I'm not like so, elbows deep in a company that I'm not really seeing the big picture. So I can
Right.
guide
Right.
folks.
Right. So if the entrepreneurs are listening to us right now, they ask themselves, why do I need a Sherpa? Why do I need a guide? What would you say to that?
I would say that the when you're running a company, and we all know this, when you're running a company, when you're running a life, it's never a straight line. There's never a playbook that aligns with exactly what you're doing. You can do as many courses as you want to, you can read as many books as you want to, but there's no straight line to get from point A to point Z. I've done what I do as an entrepreneur for 30 years. I worked in 6 different industries myself, and I've consulted for lots of other different companies and lots of different industries. I've seen a lot of things. I mean, I've sat on people's bed and consulted with them right after they got surgery. You know what I'm saying? I've dealt with breakups, I've dealt with sickness, I've dealt with, so I've seen a lot outside of just running the company, and that's really why I think, the Sherpa end of things is a more appropriate title for me in a way that I can help companies really be successful.
Absolutely. So tell us a story that exemplifies how a Sherpa can help somebody and guide them towards higher grounds.
There was a company that I'm going 2 different ways. You know what? I'm going to talk about a more recent example. So there was a company that came to me, and I'm um, familiar with what they do on a grander scale, and they said to me, "It's like, hey, Rick, I want to." Um, create different packages, for the business that I'm doing. Can you take a look at that? I was like, sure, happy to take a look at that. And she had packages, and it's something that you would see if you go to this particular industry website, and it was just like, but it was boring. It wasn't, there was nothing in there that really stood out. It's like, well, this is fine, but have you thought about these 10 things, looking at profitability, how much time you're actually spending doing, what makes you different than everybody else, et cetera, et cetera. And so we had a conversation after that, and we decided that we really needed to work together. And so, while we started off initially just talking about the products, we started thinking about the brand, right? Because we wanted to be able to stand out. We wanted to be able to charge for what she does, not hourly. Because if we're charging hourly, we're trading time for dollars. But what if we can trade for value? If we're going to someone's, situation and create an extraordinary value, why not get paid for that, right? And so we
Absolutely.
we end up going from just looking at her products to repositioning the entire brand, repositioning the entire way that she goes to market. We we don't do that in a general sense. This isn't necessarily the conversation that we're going to have. It took a lot of guts, for her to do that, but the fruit that she'll produce is extraordinary.
Absolutely. I can imagine because you really look at the big picture and thought big, not just like what can we do in order to improve this, but how can we actually make everything better, which makes a huge difference.
And it changes her lifestyle as well.
Yeah,
Because I mean, she's not in a situation where, she's getting, just enough money to put food on the table. She's getting enough money to be able to have the lifestyle that she wants to have. And so
right.
that's the important thing, looking at the whole person, not just the business.
Right. So, what questions do you ask somebody in order to actually uncover the lifestyle that they want to have?
It's really as simple as, what are you missing in your life? What's hurting? I mean, for me, I tend to look a lot at relationships.
Mhm.
husband-wife relationships, child. It was like, what's your story? What's going on? How much time are you doing the things that you want to do? I mean, this it's really basic, but that other question that, I've gotten asked a lot of times is, when's the last time you took a vacation? Are you able to take a vacation?
Well, are you, Rick, able to take a vacation?
I do now. I remember when I had my restaurant. This was, 25 years ago. And I was in there. I was in there from 8 in the morning till like 10 at night, 5, 6 days a week. And, my team literally one night, they wanted me to go on a date. And I was too busy because I'm running the restaurant. I'm the chef and the owner. And, they finally just got me to go outside. And, I'm calling like throughout the night, checking on my baby, make sure my baby's okay. It was, oh my goodness. I was so obsessed with that place. It was an amazing experience. But that's why, I think the restaurant business really gave me that really MBA level download on what really happens in entrepreneurship. I had
Absolutely. What
employees.
kind of restaurant did you have?
It was an upscale restaurant. It was in Allentown, Pennsylvania, called Petros Cafe and Coffee Bar, and we invented a cuisine called Afro Caribbean, which is an African Caribbean
Ooh, sounds
fusion.
amazing.
It was great. It was wonderful. It was, like I said, it was a wonderful experience. I had a great team. Really, really enjoyed it. But hell, it sucked the life out of me.
Right. So what are some of the lessons that you learned from it?
I think one of the biggest lessons is I tend to think big, and so we had a 100-seat restaurant, but then we also had banquet facilities, and we also had offsite catering, and then we were doing food for the there was a theater down the street, and they featured, like, live bands and that sort of thing, and so we would do like the specialty meals for them. And I was spread too thin, to be honest with you. I mean, it was bold, and I tend to, be a big thinker, but I didn't have all of the resources that were necessary to really do the level of work that I really, really wanted to do. And I would say there's actually twofold. And the other piece that I learned was it's really important to price appropriately. So
Right.
on one hand, you do cost accounting. You say, okay, this is what the product costs, per plate, per meal, et cetera, et cetera. This is my waste. And you figure all that stuff out, but that gives you a kind of a baseline price. That doesn't take into consideration the ambiance, the exclusivity, and all that good stuff. We have to take these things into consideration. What is it that we're really giving our guests, those that we serve, and how much, what does that value exchange need to look like? Not what is the least amount I can pay or I can charge them to make sure they come back again.
That's right. Or it also goes like if you want to charge more, then you have to add to it so the whole package comes together. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Total sense. Well, Rick, if our audience, the entrepreneurs that are listening to us right now, would like to get a hold of you and have a conversation with you, how can they do that?
The easiest way is really found me on LinkedIn. It's just my name, Rick Meekins. But you can also email me at rmeekins@bsv. That's Bravo. What is it? Bravo, Susan, Charlie. Man, no, it's not. bsvsherpa.com.
Cool. Absolutely. And I encourage them to do that. And thank you so much for being a guest on this podcast.
Oh, it's my great pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the System Simplified podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.